Notre Dame is 4-1 coming off their first bye week, and they're about to host the Stanford Cardinal. And by itself, that 4-1 record isn't really that shocking. But the path they took to get there, that's a different story. The biggest surprises through the first 5 games is next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm the host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And today is Thursday, October 10th. Thanks for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. This show is free and available wherever you get podcasts, and you can watch a full thing on YouTube as well. This is your reminder to please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you are watching along on YouTube, or if you're listening to the pod, please rate the show 5 stars, maybe even leave a review and subscribe on your preferred platform. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Quick programming note, I wanted to remind you that we are doing another Friday mailbag tomorrow. So remember, submit your questions. If you want to be featured on the show, you can drop them below in the YouTube comments or send them in on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. All right, with the bye week in the rear view and a big 3-game stretch coming up for the Irish, I want to use today's show to really take stock in the season so far and focus on the biggest surprises to date, both good and bad. Because I basically spent 8 months this past offseason talking about what we expected to see this season, how things would play out, and even though some things have certainly gone to plan, obviously, like Xavier Watts is still a star, Benjamin Morrison is who we thought he is, there has been a lot of things that we did not see coming. So I'm going to break down the most positive and negative developments that we did not anticipate. And then at the end, I'm going to explain what I think is sustainable from the positive developments, what can or cannot be fixed from the bad, and then ultimately how Notre Dame is able to build off the good and right some of those wrongs, especially coming out of this bye week, is really going to determine how successful this team is going to be the rest of the way. So let's start with the good surprises, right? Let's start the show on a positive note here. And honestly, I think one of the biggest surprises to date is Notre Dame's game-winning drive against Texas A&M. It's not that they won that game. I predicted them to win. I figured it'd be a low-scoring game. It was. But the way that Notre Dame won, particularly in the end, was a big surprise. And I'm referring to the game-winning drive from that Notre Dame offense because they had to go 85 yards down the field with under 7 minutes to go in the game. And 56 of those 85 yards came on the ground. Going into the game, what was the thing that everyone was talking about? The matchup between Notre Dame's very young and very inexperienced offensive line going up against Texas A&M's very good, very talented, borderline elite defensive line. I talked about it. Every other show in the country was talking about it, and most people just looked at that, and they figured that it would be so decisive in favor of A&M that would be the main reason why A&M won that game. But on that final drive, Notre Dame's offensive line kind of took it to them. And Notre Dame was able to run at will on that drive, and it set up the game-winning touchdown run by Jeremiah Love running against a stacked box, and he ran in between the tackles, ran in for a score, the go-ahead touchdown. Notre Dame ultimately ended up winning that game 23-13. Going into that game, no one would have expected Notre Dame's offense, especially the running game, to be the reason why they won late in the game, but that's exactly what happened. And with every passing week, that win over Texas A&M, especially on the road, continues to look better and better. And I think that if Notre Dame is in the playoff race at the end of the year, they are really going to point to that game as their signature win from the season. So it was a signature win and a signature moment for this offense in particular. A couple other good surprises, one on offense, one on defense. I think what Jordan Clark and Bo Collins have done this season has been terrific. They have been the best transfers that we didn't really see coming. Obviously, Riley Leonard was going to have a huge impact on this team because he's the quarterback, but I did not expect Jordan Clark to be as good as he is as the starting nickel, and I did not expect Bo Collins to be wide receiver 1. Like, Bo Collins had emerged during preseason camp. There were some positive reports. And they're like, okay, him and Jaden Greathouse are definitively going to be the starters. And I was like, okay, that's encouraging. I mean, he made some good plays at Clemson, was a top recruit coming out of high school, but I did not expect him to be the leading wide receiver on this team. But to this point, that has been the case. He leads the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns with just 17 for 181 yards and a touchdown. you would prefer your leading wide receiver to have better numbers than that, but that is sort of the state of the Notre Dame passing game right now. But still, he's been very good. Had that huge catch against Texas A&M, had that deep ball touchdown against Miami, which was the first touchdown pass of the year. He's been really good. Now, he had a bad game against Louisville. Hopefully, he's able to bounce back against Stanford because Notre Dame really needs him. And Notre Dame really needed Jordan Clark on defense, and he has been a revelation. Even though his stats aren't going to blow you away, he only has 9 tackles, 2 pass breakups. He's been very consistent for this Notre Dame defense. If you look at the player grades on Pro Football Focus, Jordan Clark has the second best grade of any starter, and he's only behind Xavier Watts. And yes, I understand all the caveats with the player grades and Pro Football Focus, but I do think that's important. And it also backs up the eye test because teams have targeted Clark 15 times. He's only given up 8 catches for 47 yards. He's extremely versatile. He came through huge for Notre Dame in that game against Louisville when their corners were dropping like flies. They had to move Jordan Clark from nickel, split out wide to play a true corner position, which I don't think he played. Certainly didn't play that all season for Notre Dame, and I don't think he played corner at all for Arizona State last season. So he was in a spot where he's not super comfortable in, but he came through for that Notre Dame defense, and I did not expect that from him going into the season. I thought he'd be okay. I was pretty skeptical of the move, especially considering the fact that Notre Dame got him so early on in that first transfer portal window, but he has been awesome for this Notre Dame defense. Another couple of defensive backs that have been awesome so far this season, Adon Schuler and Leonard Moore. Their rise this season has been awesome to watch, and it was pretty unexpected from me. I know that some people were pretty high on Schuler, and I get it. Once we found out that he beat Rod Hurd in camp, I was like, okay, he's obviously a good player if he's a redshirt freshman and he's beating out Rod Hurd, who's played like 10 million snaps of college football. That was certainly an encouraging development, and I thought he'd be a good player. But up to this point, his playmaking ability has been so impressive to me, and he has become like a real strength. Like going into the season, you can make the case that, okay, Notre Dame safeties, they've got Xavier Watts, but what do they have next to him? Hurd was pretty good at Northwestern. What was he going to be at Notre Dame? He's still been good, even though he hasn't been the starter. He played some nickel 2 weeks ago, I guess I should say, against Louisville, and he comes in. He's a really quality option as your third safety, but Adon Schuler is a playmaker, man. He's only allowed 5 catches on 10 targets this season. He has a pass breakup. Big interception in the first half against Texas A&M. He also had a really nice batted ball against Purdue where he was in coverage, and then once Hudson Card rolled out, he rushed the passer, jumped up, knocked down the ball. He is going to be a really good player, and he eases some of my concerns about the future of the safety position. And really, the future of the defensive backs is so bright because, sure, Benjamin Orson is probably going to leave after the season to play in the NFL, but then Leonard Moore is going to fill his spot next year, and I feel so good about him. Going into the season, I said Christian Gray was going to be a star, so his emergence isn't really a surprise, so he doesn't really factor into this segment, but Leonard Moore has been a surprise because who would have guessed that by the Louisville game, Leonard Moore would be the first Notre Dame cornerback off the bench? Not me. I mean, a big reason why Jane Mickey's in the transfer portal is because he just got beat out by a true freshman in Leonard Moore. So when he left and then Christian Gray missed out on the Louisville game, Notre Dame put in Leonard Moore. He played 76 snaps, and he played great. Sure, he gave up a touchdown, he gave up a couple passes, but for a true freshman making his first start, going up against that receiving corps, awesome performance by him. Really excited about his future. He hasn't been perfect, but the fact that that's your third option as a cornerback, like Leonard Moore would be starting on so many Notre Dame secondaries in the past when they just didn't have that many good defensive backs. But ever since Mike Mickens came over, man, that has been a strength, and it's going to be continue to be a strength next year and beyond. Couple more defensive surprises, Junior Tuihalamaka and Jaden Osbury. So I did not think Junior Tuihalamaka would be a factor at all on this defense going into the season. He was a third-string Viper, so it's like, yeah, typically the third-string Viper isn't a huge factor, but because of 2 unfortunate injuries at that position, Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore both suffering season-ending knee injuries, Junior was kind of thrust into some action, and he has performed well. He came up big for the Irish in that game against Miami, had a really nice play on an interception where he just laid out, caught the ball after a tip pass, but he had an even better play on the drive before that, when he prevented, he actually got the stop on third down. Miami tried to run a screen. He snuffed it out, made a great play on the running back. So he has been good. He's got 6 tackles and a sack this year. I think he's going to do even better once he splits some reps with Josh Burnham. Now that he's back from injury, they're going to split time at Viper, and Burnham is also going to cross-train at strong side end. I think it's going to help Junior Tuihalamaka because you don't want him getting like overexposed out there. But what he's been able to contribute so far for this defense has been huge because they absolutely needed it. I also want to focus on Jane Osprey real quick too, because he's exceeded all my expectations going into the year. Like, he looked really good in the spring game a couple years ago, and there are all kinds of really positive things that we're hearing about him through spring ball, even into the summer and into preseason camp. But I looked at the linebacker room, I was like, where does Jane Osprey fit in this whole equation? Because if Notre Dame's running their base defense, that usually only means that there's going to be two linebackers on the field, and we figured Jack Heiser's never coming off, and then it's going to be some combination of like Drake Bowen at the Mike, maybe KVA filling in at Mike or Will, and then you got Snead as the rover, but also as a pass rusher. So where does that leave Jane Osprey? Well, Jane Osprey has been so good. He's a player that you can't really take off the field, and I think at this point he's just beating out Jalen Snead, who's a redshirt sophomore. Jane Osprey is a redshirt freshman. So credit to him. I think the 12 snaps that Jalen Snead got against Louisville, that was not an accident, man. Jane Osprey has just been a better defender up to this point. Sure, he's had some misses. He had a bad miss against Northern Illinois, I believe it was, and they pulled him, but he went back in the game and he made some big plays. Right now, Jane Osprey is fourth in the team tackles with 18, has a pass breakup, 11 stops according to Pro Football Focus, and he's done all of this in just 133 snaps. So there have been a lot of really positive surprises on this Notre Dame defense. Not quite as much on the Notre Dame offense, which probably isn't really a big surprise considering the struggles on that side of the ball this year, but we knew that this Notre Dame defense would be great going into the season. They have been great, but they have suffered a slew of injuries, and fortunately for them, the depth behind them is even better than we expected. So those are the positives, but as we know, there have been several unsettling developments as well that we didn't see coming either, like losing the home opener to Northern Illinois. More on that right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All right. My pick this week, if you've been listening every single day, you know we've been talking about the Thursday night football games, and we got another good one in store for us tonight. 49ers at the Seahawks. The line is still at 3.5 in favor of the 49ers right now, according to FanDuel. So we are going to continue riding that play, but I also have a 4-leg same-game parlay for you. 4 guys, anytime touchdown scorers in this game. Kenneth Walker, Deebo Samuel, Jordan Mason, DK Metcalf. $10 wager on this bet. All 4 of these guys score touchdowns. That pays out $165.54 right now on FanDuel. So go check it out. Bet on the 49ers minus 3.5. And for more, just visit FanDuel.com today. All right, I think we can all be honest with ourselves here and say that most of the surprises, at least the most significant ones this season, have been bad. And was there a bigger surprise in the world than when Notre Dame lost their home opener to Northern Illinois? Nobody saw this coming. Not even me. And I've actually been given credit for calling that game when I don't deserve it because, sure, I did expect a letdown. I said I thought it'd be a close game in the second half. I caught a ton of flack for that. There were so many people who were mad at me and said that Marcus Freeman had turned the page and that we shouldn't focus on the past and has nothing to do with the future. Well, all of those people were definitively wrong because Notre Dame absolutely had a letdown game and had all the makings of a letdown game. And sure enough, they let down. But I never in a million years thought they would actually lose that game. But that's exactly what they did. So it's the worst loss in the Marcus Freeman era. And unfortunately for Notre Dame, there are several other good contenders for the worst loss in the Marcus Freeman era, but that is definitively the worst. It's worse than Marshall. It's worse than Stanford. It's worse than blowing a 3-touchdown lead in his first game as head coach in the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State. It's worse than there's been a lot of bad moments in the Marcus Freeman era. Like the highs are really high, the lows are really low. This was the ultimate low because Notre Dame had just gone on the road, just got a signature win against Texas A&M, ranked SEC opponent. Game day, the whole college football world was fixated on that. Felt like a statement win for the program, signature win, all that stuff. And then to just immediately follow that up with an embarrassing loss to Northern Illinois. Because as I've said before, sometimes there are upsets, sometimes there are accidents. This was no accident. It was an upset. It was not an accident. And Northern Illinois just outplayed Notre Dame that day. Sure, they did have that fluke touchdown for sure. But the big reason why they won is because Notre Dame could not move the ball on offense, and Notre Dame could not get Northern Illinois off the field. If they play that game 10 times, I'm confident Notre Dame wins 9. They needed some luck in order to make it happen, sure. But the fact that Notre Dame just could not move the ball consistently on offense, and the fact that they just could not stop the run from Northern Illinois, despite the fact that their best player, Ontario Brown, missed a significant chunk of the second half, that was a shocking surprise. It raised a ton of questions about Marcus Freeman and his command of the program. Fair questions, I would say. I've raised a few of them myself. And those aren't going to go away unless Notre Dame is able to do some damage in the college football playoff this season. Like, I don't even think a playoff berth would be enough. Like, they got to win a game. And now that feels a lot harder, given the injuries that this team has had and how they have looked so far this season. But that loss to NIU, that's a stain you can't wipe off, not for a long time at least. So we'll see if Notre Dame is able to avenge that to some degree. If they're going to do that, they're going to have to improve the passing game. And that is my second biggest negative surprise so far this season, because the lack of any consistent passing game has been really, really disappointing. Like, we knew Riley Leonard was developmental as a passer. I raised all my concerns about him last year. Like, when Notre Dame added him in the transfer portal, I was like, look, he's a great athlete. But when I was prepping for that Notre Dame Duke game last year and I was doing the preview, I was like, I just don't get it with Riley Leonard. How are people talking about this guy as like a future first or second round draft pick? I thought he was a great player, a great athlete. You know, he carried Duke over in their win against Clemson, the season opener, had a few rushing touchdowns. Like, he made some plays and he made some throws as well. But I was like, man, I don't know if he's that good of a thrower. And so far this year, he has been really, really inconsistent. He was rusty in the first half against Texas A&M, but I think that was pretty forgivable, especially considering the fact that he missed all of spring practice because he was dealing with ankle surgery. He didn't really have a ton of time to get connected with all of his receivers. So he's missing some throws in the first half, and you're like, okay, to be expected, right? But came through big in the second half, and you're like, okay, good. That's going to be sort of the launch point for him. Like, we can kind of see how this passing game is going to work. He hit Jane Greathouse in the third down to keep that drive alive. Hit Bo Collins going up against the Texas A&M cornerback who they called the blanket. Like, he made some big-time throws in that game. So it's like, okay, it's going to get better. Well, then it got a lot worse against Northern Illinois. And sure, I do believe he was hurt that game. That drastically impacted his ability to throw. And the fact that Notre Dame didn't run him at all in that game just takes away from the offense because Riley Leonard has been their leading rusher so far this season. So that was a really bad game. Specifically Riley Leonard, I mean, that interception that he threw there was one of the worst plays I've ever seen by a Notre Dame player, especially given the circumstances, the moment, all that stuff. So that was really bad. The first half against Miami, Ohio was abysmal. Even that game against Purdue, Notre Dame won by 1,000,000 points, but like, it wasn't like they were passing the ball all over the yard. So he needed to make some significant improvements. I thought he looked better against Louisville, made some throws, but also there's still so much more room to grow. I'm hoping that after this bye week, he can really make some strides in the passing game. Mike Denbrock had a press conference earlier this week. He felt, or at least it seemed, like he was going to be pretty optimistic about Riley Leonard and potentially turning a corner. We're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. But it's not all Riley Leonard's fault, because the lack of production from the wide receiver room, and specifically Jane Greathouse and Chris Mitchell, and you could add Mitchell Evans, the tight end, in there as well. The lack of production from those three guys in particular has been a surprise this season. Mitchell Evans has taken just more time to recover from his ACL tear that he suffered last year. So this isn't even like a criticism of Mitchell Evans. I just thought that he'd be healthier going into the season because that is what we had heard all offseason long. And then you saw him in preseason camp. He's out there, he's moving around. And then like a week before the Texas A&M game, I realized, wait a second, he's not ready to go. And if it were any other team other than Texas A&M, like if it was Northern Illinois in that season opener, Mitchell Evans probably doesn't play at all. But considering it's such a big game, they put him out there in some third down passing situations. But still, he has not looked like himself at all this season. Hopefully after the bye, he's a little bit more rested and that knee has a little bit more strength to it. So we're going to have to wait and see with Mitchell Evans. But again, that's less of a criticism. Jane Greathouse and Chris Mitchell, I'm a little bit more critical there. They've been mediocre at best. Jane Greathouse has 13 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. Chris Mitchell has 6 catches, 69 yards, 0 touchdowns. The drop by Greathouse changed the course of that NIU game because it came on third down, and you could make the case that altered the entire season. And it's hard to pinpoint it all on one play, ensure that there'd be a domino effect if he did catch it, if Notre Dame scores. Northern Illinois could still win that game. All the things that happen after that are different because the scoreboard is different. I hear you. But he's got to catch that ball. And considering all the hype and all the things we heard from the Notre Dame coaching staff going into the season about Jane Greathouse and how he's the alpha and he's going to take the step, it just hasn't happened. He looked much better as a true freshman than he does now. Obviously, part of that is on the quarterback. I'm not putting all the blame on Jane Greathouse, but I think the bigger concern I have about Greathouse is that so far, he hasn't really been able to generate a ton of separation. Like, he got schemed open against Louisville when he caught that touchdown pass, and even on that play when Riley Leonard rolled to his left, like, that was just a broken play. He found a good spot. There was a good play by Jane Greathouse. I'm not being critical, but I just feel like if he were really that good, if he were as good as all the expectations we had from going into the season, he would be more consistent. He would have better numbers. To this point, it hasn't happened. Again, hopeful that things can get figured out with him. And then there's Chris Mitchell, who Jordan Faison beat out in preseason camp. Jordan Faison was a starter in that game against Texas A&M. And there was a lot of people who looked at Chris Mitchell and looked at the stats he had when he was at Florida International, and they're like, why is he not starting? He's probably going to be the best receiver on this team. I was like, maybe. We'll see. All he did was really run fly routes, and he said that he had to learn how to be a more polished receiver once he got to Notre Dame. So far, we haven't seen it. He's supposed to be a deep threat. The only time that Notre Dame really converted on a deep threat to him was when they drew a pass interference penalty against Miami, Ohio. Need to see more out of Chris Mitchell, especially considering the fact that he's playing a lot of snaps. He had 39 snaps against Louisville, 0 catches in that game. Again, not all on these guys, but I just expected to see a little bit more from them. Like, if Chris Mitchell were as fast as we thought he was going into the season, wouldn't he just be beating corners one-on-one and he'd be wide open down the field a little bit more often? I would think so. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am on that. Another transfer who's not worked out, R.J. Oben. He's been a total bust. It's harsh, but it's true. He doesn't look anything like the player that gave Notre Dame's offensive line fits just last season. Like, you go back and you rewatch that game, R.J. Oben was just a menace going up against Notre Dame's tackles. And when Notre Dame added him in the transfer portal, I thought that was a huge addition. At one point this summer, I remember getting asked a mailbag question, like, outside of Riley Leonard, who's going to be the most impactful transfer? I picked R.J. Oben. To this point, that is a giant whiff. And frankly, I just don't really see it getting any better. He was a 0 against Texas A&M, big red flag. He was out there for a bunch of snaps, didn't get a tackle, a hurry, nothing. And I was like, okay, bad first game. It hasn't really gotten any better. He has 8 tackles, 0 sacks, and he actually got beat out by Josh Burnham before Josh Burnham suffered his injury. So I don't really know where to go from here with R.J. Oben. I hope it gets better for him because Notre Dame really needs him, especially considering the loss of Botello and Traore. But, man, he just has not looked comfortable out there. He looks like he's put on some weight, too. Maybe that's by design, and that's coming back to bite him. I'm not really sure. I'm just pointing out some observations. And Notre Dame hit big on Javonte Jean-Baptiste last year when they got him from Ohio State. I, like a lot of people, thought Oben could fill that role perfectly, and he just hasn't. And I don't want to go too much into it because I've already talked about it a lot, but Howard Cross and Riley Mills on the defensive line, they have not really lived up to expectations. That has been a surprise. I've already talked about that a lot in this podcast, so I'm going to keep it moving here. Next up, special teams. It's just been a mess. I talked about this with Luke Smith the other day. We're trying to figure out why has it been so bad, and I mentioned, like, do you think it might have anything to do with him Marty Biaggi taking an increased role coaching the safeties ever since Chris O'Leary left? But, like, Notre Dame is still going to have Marty Biaggi out there when they're doing special teams in practice, right? So I think that what they need to do is just maybe spend a little more time with team on special teams, which, you're obviously taking away from the offense and the defense, but this has been awful. Like, the blocked field goals against Northern Illinois, the botched snap on the field goal against Miami, the fumbles on kick return, the fumble to open the game against Louisville, just handed them a touchdown to start the game, the lack of consistency from James Rendell. It's been a lot of bad, and they have not done anything in the return game either, which is surprising considering their kick returner is an All-American. And it's just crazy how this changed because, like, 2 years ago, Notre Dame's special teams were a weapon under Brian Mason. They literally won games in 2022 because of their punt blocks. So they were great under him. And then last year, in Marty Biaggi's first year after Brian Mason left to join the Indianapolis Colts, like, they were good on special teams last year. Like, sure, Spencer Schrader missed some field goals, but I thought overall, like, the return, the kick coverage, all that stuff was generally solid. And then this season, with Marty Biaggi still at the helm, their special teams has been a liability. I don't get it. Doesn't make sense. They need to figure it out after the bye week. Lastly, on the negative surprises, the injuries are kind of absurd. Like, injuries happen, for sure. It's football. That's why I haven't blamed Lauren Orlando at all for any of this stuff. But the amount of critical injuries to guys who Notre Dame could not afford to get hurt, that all this has happened through 5 games is staggering. Let's go through it. Left tackle, Charles Jagasaw, out before the season even started. Like first week of preseason camp, tears his pec, out for season. Jordan Botelho, non-contact knee injury against Purdue early on in the game after he'd already had a sack and he'd had a great first couple games. Center, Ashton Craig, arguably their best offensive lineman, out for the season with a knee injury. Their best pass rusher, Boubacar Traore, out for the season with a knee injury. Those are 4 key starters. Then you've got Billy Shrout, their starting right guard, who's missed significant time with an ankle injury. Cooper Flanagan, who has missed time, their backup tight end, and arguably starting tight end at some points while Mitchell Evans was out. Jordan Faison, their starting wide receiver, he has also missed significant time. And then you added minor injuries to Christian Gray, Benjamin Morrison, even Jack Heiser missed a lot of time against Louisville. Plus, Mitchell Evans hasn't been fully healthy. Riley Leonard has had a string of injuries since he came over to Notre Dame. It has been a mess. I don't know if it's going to get better. I don't think there's been a true cause and effect situation here, but Marcus Freeman said that it was the healthiest camp they've ever had, and maybe he just jinxed him, if you believe in that sort of thing, because they have been on a terrible stretch of injuries, and as Luke and I have talked about before, usually when this happens, usually when a bunch of guys start going down, it doesn't just stop. It doesn't just get better. Usually it leads to more, and at this point, Notre Dame cannot afford any more injuries to key starters. Okay, of all the major developments of this season so far, what's sustainable and what can actually be fixed? That's next on Locked On Irish. So of all the positive and negative surprises that have happened this season, I think there's a few things that are in fact sustainable and might actually get better as the season goes along. I am most confident in Adon Schuler and Leonard Moore. I think that their rise is going to continue because as Moore gets more reps, like he's not going to be getting as many as he did against Louisville, we would hope, because Christian Gray and Benjamin Morrison are still the 2 best corners on the team. He is going to be out there. Notre Dame can trust him, and I think that he's going to continue to get better. And Don Schuler, with him and Xavier Watts back there, that's a great, great combination. And as Xavier Watts continues to dominate and improve on what he did last year, that's going to open up more opportunities for Don Schuler. So one thing Schuler needs to get better at is tackling. He has 5 missed tackles on the season. That needs to get better, but the same thing happened with Xavier Watts. He missed some tackles last season. He got better too. I think Adon Schuler will with time. So I think that is absolutely sustainable. And in the moment now, Texas A&M's drive against Texas A&M, that felt improbable. But after everything we've seen from that offensive unit since then, I doubt anybody would be very confident if Notre Dame got the ball in a tie game with 85 yards to go. So I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't know if Notre Dame could replicate that same drive again. So maybe it was just a one-off and they just came through in a huge moment. But I have my concerns about that. I think Bo Collins regressed a little bit against Louisville. But if Riley Leonard can get more comfortable and Notre Dame can kind of figure out, okay, what works and what doesn't in this passing game, I think that's going to lead to good things for Bo Collins and hopefully Jane Greathouse, Chris Mitchell, and Mitchell Evans as well. So I do actually think that the passing game can be fixed to an extent. Probably not quite to the extent that a lot of fans want it to, which is fair. Notre Dame has not had a super effective passing game in God knows how long, probably since Jimmy Clausen was quarterback. I mean, Ian Book was a really good college quarterback, and they had things clicking at times, but I'm talking about going up against the big games. Like, Notre Dame is probably not going to win a playoff game with their passing offense, right? I think that's probably fair to say. Ian Book had some really good games as a passer, but not enough to beat the elites of college football. Other than Clemson in 2020, played his best game of his career in his biggest regular season game of his career, I should say. So I think Riley Leonard, if he could get to like Ian Book level passing, that would be incredible. I don't think we're going to get there, but Riley Leonard is a better runner than him. So as long as it can get things headed in the right direction there passing game, I do think that's going to lead to better things for Bo Collins, Greathouse, Mitchell, and then Mitchell Evans as well. I don't see Jordan Clark slowing down either, so I think that's sustainable. He's been really, really good. Notre Dame needs him out there because if he gets hurt, then they got to put Rod Hurd in, and then they're thin at safety. So a lot of big concerns there. They really need to hope that Jordan Clark can stay healthy, as well as pretty much every other starter. So I also would say I'm not sure I'm as big of a believer in Junior Tuihalamaka, though, even though I think what Jordan Clark has done this season has been great. I don't feel the same confidence level in Junior Tuihalamaka. I just haven't seen enough from him as a pass rusher, and I think that the more he plays, the more tape the teams get on him, there's a chance he could get exposed, and he could be the player that we thought he was, which was a third-string Viper. But, like I said earlier, if Josh Burnham is playing a little bit more, he's taking up some of those reps. That should leave Junior Tuialamak in more advantageous situations. He's going to be a little bit more fresh, and I think he's going to be able to make some more plays than if he's out there for like 50 to 60 snaps. He's just not that type of a player. So what else can be fixed? I would say you cannot fix the NIU loss. That ain't going away anytime soon. That happened. We're all going to have to deal with that reality for the rest of our lives. I don't know if we're ever going to forget that one, unless maybe Notre Dame wins a national championship this year, and we'll look back on that and be like, oh my God, remember when they lost to NIU at home? Oh, you mean the same NIU team that immediately lost to Buffalo 2 weeks later and needed a late game comeback to beat UMass? That one. That's right. I also think Howard Cross and Riley Mills are going to improve. Again, not a huge surprise that I really want to dive into, but since I mentioned it, I'm going to say that now. I also think that the special teams will improve because we've actually seen the Notre Dame special teams be effective under Marty Biagi. Are they going to clean up all the mistakes? Is James Rundell all of a sudden going to be a consistent punter and punt it at least 50 yards every single time? Probably not. But I have faith in Mitch Jeter. I have faith in the guys back to returning now. I think they kind of figured out who they need there at punt return in Max Hurlman. I think that Jaden Harrison is going to break one. He was really, really close earlier this season in the one chance he had against Texas A&M, but a guy missed a block on the outside. Jaden Harrison gets tackled. So I'm optimistic about the special teams. Unfortunately, I am not optimistic about R.J. Oben. Just don't think it's going to get better. I'm going to be interested to see how they use Burnham. Like, how much is he going to play Viper? Because Marcus Freeman said earlier this week he's going to cross-train there. Plus Bryce Young, the true freshman, who we all think super highly of. He's a future NFL player. Like, as he gets more comfortable, is he taking snaps away from R.J. Oben? I don't know. They're going to need him to play a little bit because they just don't have that many guys. I just don't ever see R.J. Oben becoming the player or anything close to the player that we thought he would be going into the season. Overall, it has been an absolute roller coaster of a first 5 games. The highs of the Texas A&M, the lows of the NIU, and then the weird mini highs and lows in the 3 games after that with Purdue, Miami, and Louisville. It has been an odd start to the season. Like, if you had told me before the season started that Notre Dame would be 4-1 coming off that first bye week, I'd be like, disappointed, but I wouldn't be shocked. I would have guessed that they probably lost to either Texas A&M in the season opener or to Louisville at home. Well, nope, they lost to Northern Illinois. And I guess the one good thing is Notre Dame tries to get back in this playoff race here, and they are in it. They're 11th in the AP poll. If they win out, they'll get in for sure. It's a big if. If they can continue to right some of those wrongs and build off what they've done positive, then this defense and this offense could really come together, and they're not just playing complementary football to the point where the defense just has to carry that offense. Like, there are really good players in that offense. Like, I haven't even talked about Jeremiah Love today, and the big reason why is because we thought he would be great going into the season. He has been great. Jadarian Price has been really good. He had a couple, he had the bad play against Louisville where he fumbled and he gets stuffed probably a little bit too much, but there are pieces on that offense that can work. And we know that this defense is really good. And we know that Mike Denbrock, when he has the pieces together on that offense, he can really scheme up some stuff, as will Al Golden. So Notre Dame has a lot at stake in the Stanford game. Because they had this bye, because they had the opportunity to self-scout, they got to come out on Saturday and be ready to go. They have to dominate. Doesn't necessarily have to be like a full 60 minutes of like domination like Purdue, but Notre Dame has to be in complete control of this game in the second half. Like, if it's a 1-possession game late or even a 2-possession game late where Stanford even has a remote chance of winning, that will feel like a loss in my book, and my hopes for the season will really be compromised. However, if they come out and the passing game looks good and they dominate from start to finish and we actually see improvement on the offense and there aren't any more catastrophic injuries, I won't be penciling them into the playoff or anything like that, but I will feel a lot better about this team and this season. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Last call for mailbag questions. Remember, get those in. YouTube comments, X at Locked On Irish, or slide in the Instagram DMs at Locked On Irish Pod. In the meantime, remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I will see you on Friday.